Hi, welcome to the presentation of Madame Helena Blavatsky's Isis Unveiled. I'm going to be reading a lot of excerpts from her book. It's going to be the abridged version, which you should appreciate because this is an intense, huge volume that I could only get through reading the abridged version. And it's this one by Michael Nomes. Now, I have read an unabridged Blavatsky book before, The Secret Doctrine, and it took months. It took months. And that's just because I like to go at the pace where I'm actually understanding and digesting as much as I can. So I will take notes and, but day after day, reading her full text is just very time intensive. So with Isis Unveiled, the abridged version, it's shortened. It's not the full volume, but it's something that's kind of been filtered out, which I really appreciate people that take the time to do this and still turn it into something cohesive. And I've tried to do that today where I'm filtering it down even more into hopefully a presentation that won't go more than an hour, hour and a half maybe. I'm prepared to settle in because this is worth it. This is one of my top 5 authors, teachers, and I guess just ways of looking at life. So with that said, Helena Blavatsky, if you're not familiar with her, she is from the 1800s, and the Isis Unveiled was published in the late 1800s, like late 1870s, 1880s. I know that Secret Doctrine was 1888. So her works are lengthy and thorough, like I mentioned, and when she nails her point, she makes no apologies. She covers everything from religion to materialism. She goes into the Bible being corrupted, but she also spends quite a bit of time going into the teachings of Jesus the man and the Essene, the initiate, and his teachings, how they align with Buddhist principles and Oriental philosophy. And it's just beautiful when we can connect all those things and remove them from the dogma that a lot of us grew up with, that kind of diluted and made us throw out the baby with the bathwater and leave our whole religion because it was just so ridiculous. But for me, this brought me back in touch with a lot of those things, and I hope that it can do the same for you too, and to reconnect with faith teachings with new eyes. I'm going to try to keep it short and get through it, but there's no way to create a Blavatsky for dummies, nor should anyone ever do that. If you are called to this information, you'll have the patience to absorb it. This is just an introduction to the ancient wisdom and its merits. And if you're on the journey to pursuing your own spiritual life, I highly encourage you to read her unabridged works. Helena Blavatsky, in opening her book, Isis Unveiled, says, "This book shows neither mercy for enthroned error, nor reverence for usurped authority. The latest of all eternities will find its destined other half-soul in the earliest." Some principles of wisdom religion to start with. The unity of God, the immortality of the spirit, belief in salvation only through works, merit and demerit, such are the principal articles of faith of the wisdom religion, and the groundwork for Vedism, Buddhism, and Parsiism. It is not alone for the esoteric philosophy that we fight, nor for any modern system of moral philosophy, but for the inalienable right of private judgment, and especially for the ennobling idea of a future life of activity and accountability. It was Ammonius who first taught that every religion was based on one and the same truth, which is the wisdom found in the books of Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus, from which books Pythagoras and Plato had learned all their philosophy. Before the word philosopher was pronounced by Pythagoras, the secret doctrine or wisdom was identical in every country. Therefore, it is in the oldest texts, those least polluted by subsequent forgeries, that we have to look for truth. For over 15 centuries, thanks to the blindly brutal persecutions of those great vandals of early Christian history, Constantine and Justinian. Ancient wisdom slowly degenerated until it gradually sank into the deepest mire of monkish superstition and ignorance. The Pythagorean knowledge of things that are, the profound erudition of the Gnostics, the world and time-honored teachings of the great philosophers, all were rejected as doctrines of the Antichrist and paganism and committed to the flames. Philosophers divided the interminable periods of human existence on this planet into cycles, during each of which mankind gradually reached the culminating point of highest civilization and gradually relapsed into abject barbarism. So she's saying that we have cycles of civilizations fluctuating, and it helps to realize this is part of reality. We certainly weren't taught this in school. Blavatsky says that we are in a barren period where magic sympathies are lost, and the spiritual sight of the majority of mankind is so blinded as to lose every notion of its own divine spirit. She points out the malignant fever of skepticism that broke out in the 18th century. Now, when she speaks of ether, the existence of spirit in the common mediator, the ether, is denied by materialism, while theology makes of it a personal God. Ether and chaos, or in the Platonic language, mind and matter, were the two primeval and eternal principles of the universe, utterly independent of anything else. The former was the all-vivifying intellectual principle. The chaos was a shapeless liquid principle without form or sense. From the union of these two sprang into existence the universe, or rather, the universal world, the first androgynous deity, the chaotic matter becoming its body, and ether the soul. Allied to the physical half of man's nature is reason, which enables him to maintain his supremacy over the lower animals and to subjugate nature to his uses. Allied to his spiritual part is his conscience, which will serve as his unerring guide through the besetments of the senses. For conscience is that instantaneous perception between right and wrong, which can only be exercised by the spirit, and which, being a portion of the divine wisdom and purity, is absolutely pure and wise. Its promptings are independent of reason, and it can only manifest itself clearly when unhampered by the baser attractions of our dual nature. And again, of the universal ether, she says, this life principle will blindly follow the laws of nature and, according to conditions, will produce health and an exuberance of life or cause death and dissolution. But guided by the will of the adept, it becomes obedient. Its currents restore the equilibrium in organic bodies and produce physical and psychological miracles well known to mesmerizers. The condition, and this is a law in spiritual nature, is purity of motive, purity of the surrounding magnetic atmosphere, and personal purity of the operator. Tibet, Japan, and China teach in the present age that which was taught by the oldest Chaldeans, that the practice of moral and physical purity and of certain austerities develops the vital soul power of self-elimination. The profoundest and most transcendental speculations of the ancient metaphysicians of India and other countries are all based on the great Buddhist and Brahmanical principle underlying the whole of their religious metaphysics, illusion of the senses. Everything that is finite is illusion. All that which is eternal and infinite is reality. Form, color, that which we hear and feel or see with our mortal eyes, exists only so far as it can be conveyed to each of us through our senses. We all live under the powerful dominion of fantasy. And here she begins to talk about magnetism a little more. To become a genuine spiritual entity, man must first create himself anew, so to speak, i.e., thoroughly eliminate from his mind and spirit not only the dominating influence of selfishness and other impurity, but also the infection of superstition and prejudice. that powerful current of magnetism which emanates from ideas as well as from physical bodies. By this, we are surrounded and finally prevented through moral cowardice, fear of public opinion, from stepping out of it. Culture accounts for every feeling in human nature as a result of changes in our magnetic condition. Anger, jealousy, friendship, love, and hatred are all modifications of the magnetic atmosphere which is developed in us and constantly emanates from us. There are two kinds of magnetic attraction: sympathy and fascination. The one holy and natural, the other evil and unnatural. And when she brings up magnetism, she does go into therapy and healing. And of healing, she says, to deserve this name, it requires either faith in the patient or robust health united with a strong will in the operator. With expectancy supplemented by faith, one can cure himself of almost any morbific condition. But what if there is no faith in the patient? Sure, the healer may be able to restore an equilibrium in the patient's energy system. What if there is a moral disease in the healer? Blavatsky says that it is easier to cure a bodily disease than to cleanse a constitution infected with moral turpitude. There are a lot of references to Plato in here, so there are a few quotes. This is Blavatsky talking though right here. Plato acknowledges man to be the toy of the element of necessity, which he enters upon in appearing in this world of matter. He is influenced by external causes. Happy is the physically pure man, for if his external soul, his body, is pure, it will strengthen the second one, his astral body, or the soul which is termed by him the higher mortal soul. The lusts of man arise in consequence of his perishable material body, as do other diseases. But though he regards crimes as involuntary sometimes, for they result like bodily disease from external causes, Plato clearly makes a wide distinction between these causes. The fatalism which he concedes to humanity does not preclude the possibility of avoiding them. For though pain, fear, anger, and other feelings are given to men by necessity, if they conquered these, they would live righteously, and if they were conquered by them, unrighteously. The universal ether was not, in the eyes of Plato, simply something stretching, tenantless, throughout the expanse of heaven. It was a boundless ocean, peopled, like our familiar seas, with monstrous creatures, and having in its every molecule the germs of life. If there is a developed immortal spirit in man, it must be in everything else, at least in the latent or germinal state, and it can only be a question of time for each of these germs to become fully developed. What gross injustice would it be for an impenitent criminal man, the perpetrator of a brutal murder in the exercise of his free will, to have an immortal spirit which in time may be washed clean of sin and enjoy perfect happiness, while a poor horse, innocent of all crime, should toil and suffer under the merciless torture of his master's whip during a whole life and then be annihilated at death? Such a belief implies a brutal injustice that is only possible among people taught the dogma that everything is created for man. And here we get into a little bit of woo when she talks about disembodied spirits, spiritual death, and a more modern way to describe it would be perhaps sleepwalkers or zombies. The spiritual death results from disobedience of the laws of spiritual life, which is followed by the same penalty as the disobedience of the laws of natural life. But the spiritually dead still have their delights. They have their intellectual endowments and power and intense activities. All the animal delights are theirs, and to multitudes of men and women, these constitute the highest ideal of human happiness. The tireless pursuit of riches and of the amusements and entertainments of social life, the cultivation of graces of manner, of taste and dress, of social preferment, and of scientific distinction intoxicate and enrapture these dead alive. After the death of the depraved and the wicked, the critical moment arrives. And she's talking about actual death here, not the spiritual death. Death of the body. After the death of the depraved and wicked, the critical moment arrives. If, during the lifetime, the ultimate and desperate effort of the inner self to reunite itself with the faintly glimmering ray of its divine parent is neglected, and if this ray is allowed to be more and more shut out by the thickening crust of matter, the soul, once freed from the body, follows its earthly attractions and is magnetically drawn into and held within the dense fogs of the material atmosphere. When through vice, fearful crimes, and animal passions, a spirit is disembodied and fallen into the allegorical Hades, he can, with the help of that glimpse of reason and consciousness left to him, repent. That is to say, he can, by exercising the remnants of his power, strive upward. His instinct will make him avidly seek contact with living persons. These spirits are the invisible but too tangible magnetic vampires, the subjective demons so well known to medieval ecstatics, nuns, and monks, to the witches made so famous in The Witch's Hammer, and to certain clairvoyants according to their own confessions. These demons, or magnetic vampires or energy vampires, they operate within people, usually under the veil of consciousness. Blavatsky says, these demons seek to introduce themselves into the bodies of the simple-minded and idiots and remain there until dislodged by a powerful and pure will. So they're attracted to people that are kind of dead on the inside. They, as I say, like a zombie or a sleepwalker, their will is shut down, their higher cognitive functioning is shut down, their emotions are shut down. They're not fully there. They are not switched on. So that is an easy target for these disembodied spirits that are coming back. Jesus, Apollonius, and some of the apostles had the power to cast out devils by purifying the atmosphere within and around the patient so as to force out the unwelcome tenant to flight. So she's talking about, someone being possessed and then doing an exorcism of sorts by working with the magnetic field, with the energy field, by purifying the person, possibly through diet or some activities, and maybe mantras, just at every level, purification, and purification of the atmosphere, purification of the operator, like was mentioned earlier. This kind of changes the whole energy field where it's no longer compatible for this negative influence of this disembodied spirit. Let the student of occult sciences make his own nature as pure and his thoughts as elevated as those of the Indian seers, and he may sleep unmolested by vampire, incubus, or succubus. Around the insensible form of such sleeper, the immortal spirit sheds a power divine that protects it from evil approaches, as though it were a crystal wall. Happy are the pure in heart, who by that very cleanness of their inner nature unconsciously repel the dark spirits of evil. For verily they have no other weapons of defense but that inborn goodness and purity. Magnetic vampires, as she was saying, would cling to the living, to nuns and witches. Blavatsky said that Origen held that all demons which possess the demoniacs, or I think that's how you say that, demoniacs, mentioned in the New Testament to be human spirits. It is because Moses knew so well what they were and how terrible were the consequences to weak persons who yielded to their influence that he enacted the cruel, murderous law against such would-be witches. But Jesus, full of justice and divine love to humanity, healed instead of killing them. Subsequently, our clergy, the pretended exemplars of Christian principles, followed the law of Moses and quietly ignored the law of him who they call their one living God by burning dozens of thousands of such pretended witches. What both Moses and Jesus gave to the world was the fruit of their intuition or illumination. What their subsequent elders and teachers allowed the world to understand was dogmatic misrepresentations, too often blasphemy. The keys to the biblical miracle of old and to the phenomena of modern days, and the problems of psychology, physiology, and the many missing links which have so perplexed scientists of late are all in the hands of secret fraternities. This mystery must be unveiled someday, but till then, dark skepticism will constantly interpose its threatening, ugly shadow between God's truths and the spiritual vision of mankind. And many are those who, infected by the mortal epidemic of our century, hopeless materialism, will remain in doubt and mortal agony as to whether, when man dies, he will live again, although the question has been solved by long bygone generations of sages. The answers are there. They may be found on the time-worn granite pages of cave temples, on sphinxes, propylons, and obelisks. They have stood there for untold ages, and neither the rude assault of time nor the still ruder assault of Christian hands have succeeded in obliterating their records. All are covered with the problems which were solved, perhaps by the archaic forefathers of their builders. The solution follows each question, and this the Christian could not appropriate, for no one except the initiate has understood the mystic writing. The key was in the keeping of those who knew how to commune with the invisible presence and who had received from the lips of Mother Nature herself her grand truths. And so stand these monuments like mute forgotten sentinels on the threshold of that unseen world whose gates are thrown open but to a few elect. The truth cannot be destroyed. The tenacious vitality it exhibits all over the globe, wherever there are a group of men to quarrel over it, it is the best proof that the seed planted by our fathers on, quote, the other side of the flood, was that of a mighty oak. No human ridicule can fell to the ground, and no thunderbolts ever forged by the Vulcans of science are powerful enough to blast the trunk or even scar the branches of this world tree of knowledge. Blavatsky goes deeply into the false interpretations and contradictions of the Bible, mentioning the two narratives of creation in the first and second chapters of Genesis. She remarks that by using their literal interpretation, we would have to lower the dignity of the deity in order to bring him down to such a level that we endow him with personality and make him someone who needs the cool of day to refresh himself, who rests from his labors, who is capable of anger and revenge. Blavatsky speaks also of Atlantis on many occasions, in fact. She says that the Atlantis race, under the evil insinuations of their demon Thevitat, became a nation of wicked magicians. She says that the story of this war can be found in the disfigured allegories of the race of Cain, the giants, and that of Noah and his righteous family. Blavatsky writes that the conflict came to an end by the submersion of Atlantis, which finds its imitation in the stories of the Babylonian and Mosaic flood. The giants and magicians, and all flesh died, and every man. All except Xisthustros and Noah, who are substantially identical with the great father of the Thlingithians in the Popol Vuh, the sacred book of the Guatemalans, which also tells of his escaping in a large boat, like the Hindu Noah, Vivasvata. I'm sorry if I'm butchering these names. I read them, I have not heard them. I thought this was interesting too when she was talking about Atlantis, that due to an intermarrying of the progeny of the Hierophants of the island and the descendants of the Atlantean Noah, there sprang up a mixed race of the righteous and the wicked. The world had its Enochs, Moses, Gautama Buddhas, its numerous saviors and great hierophants, and on the other hand, its natural magicians who, through lack of restraining power of proper spiritual enlightenment and because of weakness of physical and mental organizations, unintentionally perverted their gifts to evil purposes. The way that she describes that makes me think of just the brain-locked armored people that I talk about. Weakness of physical and mental organizations. But let's stick with Isis Unveiled here. Now, when she gets into Christianity and occult magic, Blavatsky left no stone unturned in her investigations, and that is likewise very much the case with her extensive comparisons of Christian dogmas and miracles with the doctrines and phenomena of ancient magic. Materialists deny the phenomena without investigation, while the theologists admit the phenomena but only in absurd comprehensions. The Gnostics may have been destroyed, but the gnosis, their wisdom from the ancients, lives on. Medieval Christianity, she says, was the usurper and the assassin of the great master's doctrine. But if the knowledge of the occult powers of nature opens the spiritual side of man, enlarges his intellectual faculties, and leads him unerringly to a profounder veneration for the Creator, on the other hand, ignorance, dogmatic narrow-mindedness, and a childish fear of looking to the bottom of things invariably lead to fetish worship and superstition. Blavatsky discusses how Christianity borrowed from ancient creeds enough to perplex the world for several thousand years, she said, and that if those ancient creeds had not been speedily obliterated, it would have been impossible to preach the Christian religion as a new dispensation or direct revelation from God. Blavatsky says that Paul of the Bible used expressions and phraseology that are peculiar to Greek philosophers, and they aid in revealing Paul to have at least been partially initiated, meaning that he was taught occult science through a Gnostic sect. And here she starts telling a little bit about the allegories, where you will hear a story in the Bible. There will be a very similar story. It's too similar to be a coincidence. It's basically the same story in other religions, in texts that are thousands of years older than the one that are presented to us as this is the first time, this is the word of God, it's infallible. It's just not true when older books show that they are the origin, or they at least had it before the Christian Bible did. Referring to the story of Sarah's Demeter and her earthly wanderings, Blavatsky tells us this story was a mask for the transcendent narrative of the initiated seers, to signify occultly the condition of the unpurified soul, that the soul, till purified by philosophy, suffers death through its union with the body. Initiation was a purification process in many ways. Blavatsky says, the highest visions, the most truthful, are produced not through natural ecstatics or mediums, but through a regular discipline of gradual initiations and development of psychical powers. With the training of a teacher or guru, an adept would learn to be in subjective communication with spiritual entities, or energy signatures, we might say. As the adept begins to be able to sense and feel these energies or spirits, he is under the immediate guidance of the teacher or guru, because the student is not yet purified. He is at the mercy of any energetic influence or spirit, and he risks becoming under their control. Now, I guess I should correct myself. He may be purified, but he's not practiced. He doesn't have his muscle built up yet where he can be sensitive enough to feel these influences and be in subjective communication, but also not let them overtake him mentally, physically, emotionally, just to basically infect him. That is what they are taught. That's part of the initiation process, is to be in the presence of these energies and not have these foreign influences become anywhere near as strong as the what's fortified inside them, their attachment to the spirit. Oh, and she also says, happy is the sensitive who is sure of the purity of his spiritual atmosphere. It's kind of what I mean by the fortification. Purity, it gives you a confidence. You know that you're just untouchable. Okay. These mystery schools only bothered teaching the activation of these powers in students who could prove themselves capable of discipline, dedication, and reverence. Only those who were able to live such that they acquired and maintained a purified energy field could hope to be non-sympathetic with evil influences that would otherwise take over or possess the student. There was no real danger to him whose mind had become thoroughly spiritualized, Blavatsky said, and so prepared for every terrific sight. But woe to the candidate in whom the slightest physical fear, sickly child of matter, made him lose sight and faith in his own invulnerability. He who was not wholly confident of his moral fitness to accept the burden of these tremendous secrets was doomed. Now we'll go into Jesus and how he was kind of a Buddhist, which I love it. I love it. The religion which the primitive teachings of a few early apostles most resembled, a religion preached by Jesus himself, is Buddhism. Buddhism, as taught by the last of the Buddhas, Gautama, based its moral ethics on three fundamental principles. 1. Everything existing exists from natural causes. 2. Virtue brings its own reward, and vice and sin their own punishment. 3. The state of man in this world is probationary. Now, Blavatsky notes that when she says Buddhism, she refers not to the exoteric Buddhism instituted by the followers of Gautama Buddha or the modern Buddhistic religion, but the secret philosophy of Sakyamuni, which in its essence is identical with the ancient wisdom religion of pre-Vedic Brahmanism. Now, Jesus, the Christ God, is a myth concocted 2 centuries after the real Hebrew Jesus died. And the Gospel according to Matthew is a fabrication based upon a wholly different manuscript. And as to the real living Jesus, he begins his sermon with certain purely Buddhistic precepts that has found acceptance among the Essenes and generally practiced by the Orphikhoi and the Neoplatonists. He tried to imbue the hearts of his audience with a scorn for worldly wealth, a fakir-like unconcern for the morrow, and love for humanity, poverty, and chastity. In his immense and unselfish love for humanity, he considers it unjust to deprive the many of the results of the knowledge acquired by the few. This result he accordingly preaches, the unity of a spiritual God whose temple is within each of us and in whom we live as he lives in us in spirit. Now, about the Essenes. The Essenes were the converts of Buddhist missionaries who had overrun Egypt, Greece, and even Judea at one time. While it is evident that the Nazarene reformer Jesus belonged to the Essenes as a pupil, Jesus is known to later on disagree with his early teachers on several questions of formal observance. But Jesus was preaching the philosophy of Buddha Sakyamuni. Blavatsky says, the motive of Jesus was evidently like that of Gautama Buddha, to benefit humanity at large by producing a religious reform which should give it a religion of pure ethics, the true knowledge of God and nature having remained until then solely in the hands of the esoteric sects and their adepts. So Jesus ended up coming across more Buddhists than strictly Essene, because in that school they were very, very strict. They were ascetics. They honored Sabbath religiously, literally. I think that those constraints ended up seeming arbitrary and kind of against the greater purpose of what he was called to do. And as you know, he's referred to as Jesus Christ, the myth of the God-man. But let's talk about Christ, or Christos, for a moment. Blavatsky says, in the ideas of the Christians, Christ is but another name for Jesus. The philosophy of the Gnostics, the initiates and hierophants, understood it otherwise. Christos, as a unity, is but an abstraction, a general idea representing the collective aggregation of the numberless spiritual entities which are the direct emanations of the infinite, invisible, incomprehensible first cause, the individual spirits of men, erroneously called souls. They are the divine sons of God. Some unite themselves with godlike human beings, like Gautama Buddha, like Jesus, or Lao Tzu, or Krishna. Jesus, as one of the great reformers, an inveterate enemy of every theological dogmatism, a persecutor of bigotry, and a teacher of one of the most sublime code of ethics, Jesus is one of the grandest and most clearly defined figures in the panorama of human history. According to Marcion, The mission of Jesus was to abrogate the Jewish Lord, who was opposed to the God and Father of Jesus Christ, as matter is to spirit, impurity to purity. I found this interesting, using these terms to illustrate the opposition between Jesus and Jehovah. There's a hint of life force expression versus life force suppression in those comparisons. Jesus was openly rebellious to the false laws of the Jewish Lord. Blavatsky says, the language of Jesus is unequivocal. It implies not only rebellion, but defiance of the Mosaic Lord God. Ye have heard, he tells us, that it hath been said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say unto you, that ye resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. Ye have heard that it hath been said, thou shalt love thy neighbor and hate thine enemy. But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. That's Matthew 5:38 through 44. And here we are comparing another verse from Matthew with a verse from the Pittakathayan book 3, and they are nearly identical, and it's about the golden rule basically. Matthew 19 verse 16 through 18 says this: Good master, what shall I do that I may have eternal life? Asked the man of Jesus. Keep the commandments. Which? Thou shalt do no murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. And the Pittakathayan book 3 Pali version says this: What shall I do to obtain possession of Bodhi, knowledge of eternal truth? Asked a disciple of his Buddhist master. What way is there to become an upasaka? Keep the commandments. What are they? Thou shalt abstain all thy life from murder, theft, adultery, and lying. Regarding the integrity of the Bible, Gnostics have said that the Old Testament is from an inferior subordinate divinity and not of divine wisdom, Sophia, and that the New Testament lost its purity when the compilers became guilty of interpolations. So it's not all bad or all wrong, but it's been messed with, and by the false pretenses being an infallible and direct word of God, it is not as a whole considered a dispensation of ancient wisdom. The book of Genesis is, in Blavatsky's words, a chip from the trunk of the mundane tree of universal cosmogony rendered in oriental allegories. As cycle succeeded cycle, and one nation after the another came upon the world stage to play its brief part in the majestic drama of human life, each new people evolved its own religion from ancestral traditions, giving it a local color and stamping it with its individual characteristics, all preserving a common likeness to one prototype, the primitive wisdom religion. One by one perished the Gnostics, the only heirs to whose share had fallen a few stray crumbs of the unadulterated truth of primitive Christianity. All was confusion and turmoil during these first centuries, till the moment when all these contradictory dogmas were finally forced upon the Christian world, and examination was forbidden. For long ages it was made a sacrilege, punishable with severe penalties, often death, to seek to comprehend that which the Church had so conveniently elevated to the rank of divine mystery. And so all our philosophers were swept away by the ignorant and superstitious masses. Ammonius Saccas said, "The whole which Christ had in view was to reinstate and restore to its primitive integrity the wisdom of the ancients, to reduce within the bounds the universally prevailing dominion of superstition, and to exterminate the various errors that had found their way into the different popular religions." From the very day when the first mystic found the means of communication between this world and the worlds of the invisible host, between the sphere of matter and that of pure spirit, he concluded that to abandon this mysterious science to the profanation of the rabble was to lose it. An abuse of it might lead mankind to speedy destruction, like surrounding children with explosive batteries and furnishing them with matches. The first self-made adept initiated but a select few and kept silence with the multitudes. The Atman, the I Am, showed his full power to him who could recognize the still small voice. We must bear in mind, Blavatsky says, the teachings of the old philosophies. The spirit alone is immortal. The soul, per se, is neither eternal or divine. When linked too closely with the physical brain of its terrestrial casket, it gradually becomes a finite mind, a simple animal and sentient life principle. And here she mentions a little bit about the symbolical interpretation that we should be using when we go to the Bible, but we really lack the understanding of symbolic language. For instance, the Temple of Solomon. The building of the Temple of Solomon is the symbolical representation of the gradual acquirement of the secret wisdom or magic, the erection and development of the spiritual from the earthly, the manifestation of the power and splendor of the spirit in the physical world through the wisdom and genius of the builder. There are words which have a destructive quality in their very syllables, Blavatsky says, as though objective things, for every sound awakens a corresponding one in the invisible world of spirit, and the repercussion produces either a good or bad effect. Harmonious rhythm, a melody vibrating softly in the atmosphere, creates a beneficent and sweet influence that acts most powerfully on the psychological as well as physical natures of every living thing on earth, even on inanimate objects. And it is the same with numbers. She does go into numerology, but that's one of those things that we're just kind of skipping over here. Now, back to Genesis. Genesis is a metaphysical conception of some indefinite period in the eternity when successive attempts were being made by the law of evolution at the formation of the universes. According to Blavatsky, such a concept is stated in the Zohar. Blavatsky goes into the formation of the earth, beginning with the rescue of Noah from the deluge. She says there is a geological cataclysm at the end of every minor cycle of our globe, and that new races of men and animals and a new flora evolve from the dissolution of the precedent ones. Blavatsky also posits, interestingly to me, that there was perhaps a period where man existed but not as an organic vestige, meaning that he didn't have bones, and so he didn't leave anything behind to offer people that are looking only at scientific history. Now, here we start talking about the devil. The devil, in his various transformations, can be but a fallacy. When we imagine that we see, hear, and feel him, it is but too often the reflection of our own wicked, depraved, and polluted soul that we see, hear, and feel. Like attracts like, they say. Thus, according to the mood in which our astral form oozes out during the hours of sleep, according to our thoughts, pursuits, and daily occupations, all of which are fairly impressed upon the plastic capsule called the human soul, the latter attracts around itself spiritual beings congenial to itself. You could say those that are in sympathetic resonance. The devil, in Christian theology, it is a malignant deity, but it is wisest to interpret any use of this term as meaning the dark side of nature, or the antagonistic blind force, the shadow of light. It is antagonistic, yet essential to the vitality, evolution, and vigor of the good principle. Night alternating with day is essential to the healthy growth and development of many organisms. That's just one example. Goodness would cease to be such were it not alternated by its opposite. In human nature, evil denotes the antagonism of matter to the spiritual. Each is accordingly purified thereby. And so we're talking about antagonism being this oppositional force that it's antagonistic, yes, but it is necessary for the back and forth movement of life. If we didn't have this devil, the antagonism force, it would be like having one leg. You need two legs. There's equilibrium, there's movement, there's a balance that is coming from these oppositional forces. They're actually supporting each other. And this goes into cosmology. And here she talks about equilibrium in the cosmos. In the cosmos, equilibrium must be preserved. The operation of two contraries produces harmony. Like the centripetal and centrifugal forces, they are necessary to each other. If one is arrested, the action of the other immediately becomes destructive. Now, Satan was a term for the office or character of a public accuser, held in much the same regard as our public prosecutor would be. The antagonistic force that no doubt helps us define by way of contrast, it helps us define what is true and good. In Job, there is a beautiful story which I cannot do justice in the time constraints of this presentation, but it pertains to the nature of the devil and man's ability to assert his own truth and purity over the illusions that abound. There are several pages committed to the allegory within the book of Job, and I encourage anyone who's interested to read it for themselves along with the rest of this book. But I'm forced to leave out a ton of stuff here, but it's well worth the investment and good for cracking open the old brain cage. But after the Job interpretation, Blavatsky writes of the European concept of the devil. He is the genius who deals in sorcery, witchcraft, and other mischief. The fathers, taking the idea from the Jewish Pharisees, made devils of the pagan gods, Mithras, Serapis, and the others. The Roman Catholic Church followed by denouncing the former worship as commerce with the powers of darkness. The Malefici and the witches of the Middle Ages were thus but votaries of the proscribed worship. Magic in all ancient times had been considered as divine science, wisdom, and the knowledge of God. The healing art in temples of Asclepius and the shrines of Egypt and the East had always been magical. Once learning was denounced, the savants pursued the sciences in peril of their lives, and they were compelled to employ a jargon to conceal their ideas from all but their own adepts. Kind of like speaking in parables. The votaries of the ancient wisdom, Blavatsky says, were persecuted and put to death on charges of witchcraft. The Albigensians, descendants of the Gnostics, and the Waldensians, precursors of the Protestants, were hunted and massacred under like accusations. Martin Luther himself was accused of companionship with Satan in proper person. And Blavatsky also talks about, like how she was saying, that there are cycles that saviors kind of manifest in conjunction with these cycles, and they tend to show up as virtue is declining in humanity. Like Sakyamuni and Jesus, Krishna seems to have been a real being, deified by his school in history, made to fit into the framework of the time-honored religious program. The three personalities of Krishna, Gautama, and Jesus appeared like true gods, each in his epoch, and bequeathed to humanity three religions built on the imperishable rock of ages. That all three, especially the Christian faith, have in time become adulterated, and the latter almost unrecognizable, is no fault of any noble reformers. Purify the three systems of the human dogmas, and the pure essence remaining will be found identical. Now, a final word on Christian blindness. A supreme power can have neither wrath nor mercy, Blavatsky says. We have often wondered at the extraordinary ideas of God and his justice that seem to be honestly held by those Christians who blindly rely on the clergy for their religion and never upon their own reason. Using the Buddhistic standpoint to discuss Christianity, Blavatsky shows that a series of sophistries directed toward the one object of tightening the ecclesiastical yoke upon the popular neck, its acceptance as divine command, has been officially effected. It has proved one of the most pernicious and demoralizing of doctrines. So let's talk about Oriental philosophy. We keep alluding to this. Let's look at some actual principles. I believe there are 10. Are there 10? Yeah. So number 1, there is no miracle. Everything that happens is a result of law, eternal, immutable, and ever active. 2, nature is triune. There is a visible objective nature, an invisible indwelling energizing nature, the exact model of the other and its vital principle. And above these two, spirit, source of all forces, alone eternal and indestructible. The lower two constantly change. The higher third does not. 3. Man is also triune. He has his objective physical body, his vitalizing astral body or soul, the real man. And these two are brooded over and illuminated by the third, the sovereign, the immortal spirit. 4. Magic as a science is the knowledge of these principles and of the way by which the omniscience and omnipotence of the spirit and its control over nature's forces may be acquired by the individual while still in the body. Magic as an art is the application of this knowledge in practice. 5. Arcana knowledge misapplied is sorcery. Beneficently used, true magic or wisdom. I should probably say that again since I butchered it. Should that say ancient? Arcana, ancient knowledge, misapplied is sorcery. Beneficently used, it is true magic or wisdom. 6. Mediumship is the opposite of adeptship. The medium is the passive instrument of foreign influences, while the adept actively controls himself and all inferior potencies. 7. All things that ever were, that are, that will be, having their record upon astral light or tablet of the unseen universe, can be known by the initiated adept using the vision of his own spirit. 8. Races of men differ in spiritual gifts as in color, stature, or any other external quality. Among some people, seership naturally prevails, among others, mediumship. Some are addicted to sorcery and transmit its secret rules of practice from generation to generation. 9. One phase of magical skill is the voluntary and conscious withdrawal of the inner man, the astral form, from the outer man, the physical body. In the cases of some mediums, withdrawal occurs, but it is unconscious and involuntary. And 10. The cornerstone of magic is an intimate practical knowledge of magnetism and electricity and their qualities, correlations, and potencies. Especially necessary is a familiarity with their effects in and upon the animal kingdom and man. To sum it up, magic is spiritual wisdom. Nature is the material ally, pupil, and servant of the magician. One common vital principle pervades all things, and this is controllable by the perfected human will. Such experiments are not obstructions of nature, but quickenings. The conditions of more intense vital action are given. The adept retains perfect consciousness, requires no special conditions, and instead of being passive and in subjection to a foreign influence, he rules the forces with an iron will. The body, soul, and spirit of the adept are all conscious and all working in harmony. To what practical issue does this book tend? Blavatsky says, do we wish to affirm that the occult sciences ought to be studied and practiced throughout the world? Would we replace modern spirituality with ancient magic? Neither. The substitution could not be made, nor the study universally prosecuted, without incurring the risk of enormous public dangers. We would have neither scientists, theologians, nor spiritualists turn practical musicians, but all to realize that there was true science, profound religion, and genuine phenomena before this modern era. We would that all who have a voice in the education of the masses should first know and then teach that the safest guides to human happiness and enlightenment are those writings which have descended to us from the remotest antiquity, and that nobler spiritual aspirations and a higher average morality prevail in the countries where the people take their precepts as the rule of their lives. She continues, we would have that all realize that magical or spiritual powers exist in every man, and have those few practice them who feel called to teach and are ready to pay the price of discipline and the self-conquest which their development exacts. There being but one truth, man requires but one church, the temple of God within us, walled in by matter but penetrable by anyone who can find the way. The pure in heart see God. The trinity of nature is the lock of magic, the trinity of man the key that fits it. A final word on magic. Sophisticated Europeans ain't got time for that. Magic, most imperative of mistresses, brooks no rival. Unlike other sciences, A theoretical knowledge of formulas without mental capacities or soul powers is utterly useless in magic. The spirit must hold in complete subjection the combativeness of what is loosely termed educated reason, until facts have vanquished cold human sophistry. Primitive peoples may have disappeared, but primitive wisdom survives, and it is attainable by those who, quote, will, dare, and can keep silent. To me, this implies the importance of it being a private individual pursuit of self-initiation. In closing, Blavatsky writes, "Our fervent wish has been to show true souls how they may lift aside the curtain and, in the brightness of that night-made day, look with undazzled gaze upon the unveiled truth." Thank you for watching.